Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
And today we are taking a deep dive into the absolute deluge of quantified claims that really define modern life.
You really do.
And maybe more importantly, the architecture of how misleading information gets generated and, spread around.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
Our source material for this deep dive is a phenomenal, I'd say essential handbook for survival in the data age. It's called Calling Bullshit: The Art of Skepticism in a Data-Driven World by Carl T. Bergstrom and Jevin D.
Yeah, it's such necessary reading because, think about it, the world is so thoroughly quantified now.
Completely.
Everything is measured, analyzed, assessed. Your average Tuesday, right? Your phone is counting your steps.
Mm-hmm.
Your smart car might be uploading data on your braking habits. You've got sensors monitoring city infrastructure, complex algorithms constantly analyzing your purchase history.
Just to predict what you might buy next week.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. We are, and this is not an exaggeration, absolutely swimming in a sea of numbers, percentages, and charts, and all of them are claiming some kind of authority.
And that's the key word, isn't it?
Yeah.
Authority. It's not just the volume of the information, it's the weight that comes with it.
Yes.
The second a claim, whether it's for a medical breakthrough or a new political policy, gets draped in the language of quantitative analysis, it feels, unassailable.
It does. It presents this massive opportunity for manipulation and, frankly, just information overload. Suddenly, the simplest statement feels incredibly weighty, and it feels like the only defense you have is to be an expert yourself.
Which is the big lie, right? That's the lie we need to dispel today.
That is exactly the lie.
Yeah.
The author's central premise, and I love this, is that you don't need a PhD in statistics to spot a fundamentally flawed argument.
Right.
So often, the flaw isn't in the complex math in the middle, it's in the data they put in at the start, or the way they present the result at the end.
So our mission today is to move past just spotting individual bad arguments or a dodgy chart here and there. We're looking at the systems that enable this flood of persuasive, yet ultimately, hollow information. We need to examine the architecture of information, the perverse incentives.
Especially online.
Especially online. And the use of authority that allows all this bullshit to just flourish. It's about separating fact from fiction, and I think developing skepticism as a core habit of mind to face this onslaught, as they call it.
I think that's the perfect way to frame it.
So to start, maybe let's look at the authors, who are Carl Bergstrom and Jevin West.
They're both professors at the University of Washington, and they bring this really interesting mix of expertise from biology, data science, and science communication.
So that's a great combination.
It's the perfect blend, right? They understand the complexity of data on one hand, but also the dynamics of how we communicate it on the other. It makes them perfectly suited to tackle this intersection.
And the book itself, it didn't just come out of nowhere. It actually originated from a university course they taught.
Yes, and not just any course. A massively popular one at the University of Washington, also titled Calling Bullshit.
I love that title for a course.
Me too. They realized that students, even students specializing in the sciences, were constantly being confronted with these complex data-heavy claims, and they lacked the basic logical toolkit to vet them.
So it's not about being a math genius.
Not at all. And that's the key takeaway right there. The goal of the course, and now the book, is to empower you. It's to say, look, you don't need to be a professional statistician or a highly trained data scientist.
Right.
Basic logical reasoning, maybe augmented with a few simple search tools, is often more than enough to identify the fraud.
And this brings us to probably the most important philosophical clarification they make right at the start.
Yeah.
They draw on the philosopher Harry Frankfurt and his famous essay.
Yes.
And it's the definition of bullshit itself and how it differs, crucially, from a lie.
This is such an important distinction to get your head around. When someone tells an outright lie, they need two things. First, they have to know the truth. And second, they have to be actively trying to conceal that truth. And there's a high price for that. If you get caught in a serious lie, you face pretty strong social sanctions. You could lose your job, get sued, be ostracized.
The liar, in a way, is acknowledging that the truth matters.
That's it. They acknowledge its importance by choosing to fight against it.
Okay, so how is the bullshitter different?
The bullshitter is operating under a completely different framework. Bullshit, as they define it, is any language, any data presentation, any graphic that's intended to persuade or impress an audience, often by distracting them or overwhelming or intimidating them. But here's the crucial part. It's done with a blatant disregard for truth, logical coherence, or the information actually being conveyed.
So it's not anti-truth, it's a truth, it's just indifferent.
It is the indifference to accuracy that is so strategically powerful. The bullshitter doesn't necessarily know what the truth is. Frankly, they don't care.
Their goal is just the persuasive effect.
The effect. Or, as the authors put it, sometimes it's just filling of space with the inconsequential, you know, using overly convoluted language or impressive-looking charts just to give off this exaggerated sense of authority.
So to put it simply, a liar is trying to thwart the truth, which means they're still playing on the same field as the truth.
Yes.
A bullshitter has already left that field entirely. And that indifference, that's what makes it so much more corrosive, especially in a world with so much data.
It is. Because since they don't have to check their facts, they can produce massive amounts of content incredibly quickly.
Right.
And if one claim gets proven wrong, they don't care. They just move on to the next one. They're focused on presentation and rhetorical flair, not accuracy. They're selling you statistical snake oil.
And it's that low-stakes, high-volume indifference that makes calling bullshit, actively rejecting that indifference, such a necessary act.
Absolutely. It's an act of civic hygiene in our modern world.
Okay, let's move into the specific mechanics then. How does this low-stakes persuasion actually happen? Let's start with language, stuff we use every single day. The authors focus on two classic techniques, paltering and the use of weasel words.
Paltering is it's a fascinating linguistic tool because it allows the speaker to mislead someone while stating things that are, technically not untrue.
So you're not telling a direct falsehood.
Not at all. But you are deliberately leading the listener to draw the wrong conclusion. And this is why people do it so often. It gives you plausible deniability if you get challenged later on.
The book uses the classic historical example, right? Bill Clinton's 1998 declaration about Monica Lewinsky.
That's the one. He said, there is no sexual relationship.
And when all the details came out later, his entire defense rested on one word.
The present tense verb is. He argued that, well, he was only referring to the relationship in the present tense. He wasn't denying that one had previously existed.
It's the ultimate linguistic dodge.
It is. And the mechanism that allows this to work so well is a concept from linguistics called implicature.
Okay, break that down for us.
Implicature is just the difference between what a sentence literally means and what it's used to mean in a given context. We rely on it constantly for efficient communication.
Right, so if you ask me, do you have change for a 20? And I say, my wallet is empty.
Mm-hmm.
The literal truth is just that my wallet has no bills in it. But the implicature, the meaning I intend for you to take away is that, no, I can't give you change. We fill in the gaps.
We fill in the gaps for efficiency. And that gap between the literal truth and the intended meaning, that's where paltering lives and thrives.
So give me another example.
Okay, say I'm a manager and a client asks me about an employee named John. I could say, John is not the most punctual worker I've ever known.
Okay.
Now, that might be technically true. Maybe I worked with some guy 30 years ago who was infinitesimally more punctual.
Right, so you're covered.
I'm covered. But the implication you, the client, take away is that John is frequently late or unreliable. The literal statement shields me, while the implication does all the persuasive work.
And that leads right into weasel wording, which feels like the institutional version of this.
It is. It's ambiguity used to avoid taking responsibility or making firm commitments. Advertising is just saturated with it.
Oh, yeah.
Think about a claim that a new toothpaste reduces plaque by up to 50%.
The up to.
That up to is the weasel word, doing all the heavy lifting. The only way that statement would be technically false is if the toothpaste worked too well, reducing plaque by 51% or more.
It suggests this massive potential benefit, but it offers absolutely no genuine promise that you personally will get anywhere near that 50% reduction.
Exactly. And in politics, we see the absolute masterpiece of weasel wording, the ultimate non-apology phrase.
Mistakes were made.
Mistakes were made. It's perfect, isn't it? It acknowledges that, yes, an error occurred, which satisfies the public's need for some kind of acknowledgement. But it crucially uses the passive voice. It assigns culpability to no one, no specific person, no entity. It's like linguistic Teflon. It lets public figures and organizations offer a non-apology that just lubricates the political machine without anyone actually having to take ownership.
So we've seen how language can hide the truth. But let's be honest, the most convincing trick, the one that really gets people, is when you introduce numbers.
Yes. Quantitative bullshit.
Let's get into how statistics are manipulated, starting with what the authors call the black box problem.
Right. So in modern data science, you have a lot of specialized procedures or really complex algorithms, like the one that might recognize faces in your photos or predict your risk for a loan.
Okay.
These things function as black boxes. They take data in, they perform all these specialized operations inside, and then they spit out a result. But the procedures are so complex that the average person, and honestly, often the people running them, can't really scrutinize the internal workings.
And that complexity acts like a shield.
It absolutely does. When you hear that an algorithm was used, your guard just tends to drop. You think, well, the math must be sound. It feels like, scientific heresy to question the output.
But the authors have a really powerful insight here.
They do. They say you rarely, if ever, need to open that analytical black box to call bullshit. The problem almost always comes from one of two places.
Which are?
The quality of the data you feed into the box.
Garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly, the old Giago adage. Or there are obvious problems with the results that it spits out.
They talk about a study, a machine learning study, that tried to predict criminality based on facial features.
Yes, and this is a perfect example. The algorithm learned to detect who was smiling.
It was just detecting smiles.
Yeah, because the faces in the non-criminal training set were, just normal photos where people were generally smiling. But the faces in the criminal training set were all mugshots.
Where nobody smiles.
Almost never. So the algorithm wasn't predicting crime at all. It was just detecting the facial expressions created by the data collection process itself.
And you don't need to understand neural network architecture to see that that result is biased and just nonsensical.
Not at all. Basic logic and understanding the limitations of your input data are all you need.
Okay, so moving past the black box itself, let's look at how numbers are actively misused. Specifically, what they call slippery percentages, or the denominator trick.
This is one of the most common rhetorical tools you'll ever see. It's used to minimize a problem or exaggerate a crisis simply by strategically choosing the comparison beta, the denominator.
The Google example in the book is just stunning. Google is getting criticized for having, inappropriate or misleading content show up in search results.
Right. And a Google VP publicly addressed this. He said that around 0.25% of daily queries were returning offensive content.
0.25%. Sounds tiny.
It sounds incredibly small, especially when Google compares that 0.25% to the hundreds of billions of pages in their index, which they did.
But the size of the index is completely irrelevant.
Totally irrelevant. What we need to look at is the number of queries that are being misled. That's the denominator that matters.
So if we do some quick back-of-the-envelope estimation, just a sanity check estimates, put Google's daily queries at roughly 5.5 billion.
Okay.
Suddenly, 0.25% of 5.5 billion is, it's well over 13 million queries a day.
13 million queries a day returning inappropriate content.
That's a massive crisis in information delivery. But it's the exact same quantity that sounds so manageable when you frame it as a tiny fraction of billions of pages.
It's pure framing, and we see this all the time with confusing percentage points versus percentage change.
Ah, yes, the politician's favorite.
Totally. If a politician says they plan to raise a tax rate from 4% to 6%, they can frame it by saying it's only a 2 percentage point increase. And that sounds modest.
But it's not the full story.
No. Because 6 cents is 50% more than the original 4 cents. So if you're comparing the magnitude of the tax itself, it's a 50% hike.
So you always have to ask, are they talking about the absolute difference, the percentage points, or the relative magnitude, the percentage change?
Because the choice they make dictates the entire narrative.
And maybe the most egregious quantitative fluff, especially in health reporting, is the misuse of relative risk distortion.
The headlines. They scream things like, "There's no safe level of alcohol," major new study concludes.
And that immediately triggers a huge reaction. It sounds like guaranteed danger.
It sounds terrifying, but if you actually dig into the raw numbers from the study the authors cite, what does it say? Having one drink per day has a relative risk of 1.0055.
So you're 1.0075 times more likely to have an alcohol-related issue compared to a non-drinker.
Right. It's a 0.5% increase in risk. And when you apply that tiny increase to a very, very low baseline rate, it translates to only 4 additional cases.
Or how many people?
Per 100,000 people. Per year. This is where context is absolutely everything. The change is negligible for any single individual.
And the author's analysis of what it would take to cause that one extra case is just staggering.
It's amazing. To cause one single additional illness across the population, you would need 25,000 people to each consume one drink a day for an entire year.
25,000 people.
Or, as another commentator put it, you'd need that group to drink 400,000 bottles of gin to cause one additional case.
So that relative risk statistic, when you just strip it of its absolute context, is purely designed to do one thing.
Shock and capture attention. It's fulfilling the mandate of the click economy, not informing the public accurately.
All of this statistical trickery, it kind of brings us to the big one, right? The most frequent misuse of data in the popular press.
Oh yeah, confusing correlation with causation.
The phrase correlation does not imply causation is something we all learn, but it's violated constantly.
Constantly. Because reporters, and let's be fair, media consumers too, we crave a clear, compelling story. Cause and effect is sticky. Mere association is, well, it's boring.
And often it's just from carelessness. You find an association like rising home prices are correlated with fewer babies being born.
Right.
And reporters just jump straight to causality. You'll see a headline that says there's an adverse effect of high home prices, fewer babies.
They use that loaded word, effect.
Right, to imply a causal link where only a correlation was actually observed. But without a controlled experiment, we can't confirm the direction of that relationship.
Or if there's a hidden third factor that's driving both things.
Exactly. The authors use this great example of an NPR listener survey.
I love this one.
A poll found that NPR listeners were statistically less likely to fall for false claims than other groups.
So naturally, an NPR reporter excitedly tweets out this advice: inoculate yourself against BS. Listen to NPR.
It sounds like a clear prescription, a way to improve your critical thinking.
It does, but we have no idea if listening to NPR actually causes skepticism.
Or if people who are already skeptical just choose to listen to NPR because its content tends to be more fact-based than some of the alternatives.
Right. It could just be a self-regarding signal of identity. I'm the kind of person who listens to NPR. It's not a genuine inoculation against data manipulation at all.
So the only reliable way to tease these things apart, to figure out the real direction of the relationship, is through what?
Through manipulative experiments, specifically the gold standard, randomized controlled trials, or RCTs.
The medical example they use with fever is maybe the most powerful way to understand why this matters so much.
It's a great illustration. Observational data shows that patients who get a fever when they have a serious bloodstream infection are more likely to survive.
So that suggests that fever, let's call it A, leads to better outcomes, B.
That's the simple story. But we can't ignore the possibility of a third confounding variable. Let's call it C. Maybe a better underlying physical condition, C, is what allows the patient to both mount a strong fever, A, and naturally leads to a better outcome, B.
So if C is the real cause of both,
then doctors who try to treat the fever, A, might actually be interfering with a necessary biological process and making the patient worse off.
and this highlights the huge problem of selection bias.
Exactly. In the real world, doctors would probably only give fever-reducing drugs to the sickest patients. So if you then compare the outcomes of those who got the drug to the general population, the treatment group will naturally have worse outcomes.
Making it look like the drug caused the bad result.
Right, when really the group that was selected for the treatment was just sicker to begin with.
And this is what RCTs solve.
This is exactly what they solve. By randomly assigning the treatment, some patients get the drug, some get a placebo, regardless of how sick they are. You distribute all those unobserved factors, like their underlying physical condition, equally between the groups.
So any difference in the outcome must then be due to the treatment itself.
That's why it's the gold standard, the only way to separate true cause from just a spurious association.
And speaking of spurious association, we have to take a moment to appreciate the delightful and kind of terrifying world of spurious correlation.
Oh, yes. These are patterns that exist purely by chance. They're often generated by researchers who are engaging in massive data dredging. It's when you compare millions of unrelated time series data points until, just by sheer random chance, you find two patterns that happen to track together.
Tyler Vigen's website is the masterclass in this.
It is. He documents these examples, and it perfectly shows the absurdity of finding a pattern where there is absolutely no connection.
The chart showing the relationship between the age of Miss America and the number of murders by steam, hot vapors, and hot objects.
Yeah.
It's just mesmerizing.
It is. The lines track almost perfectly for a decade. It looks like an incredibly tight relationship.
But the actual meaningful connection between beauty pageant contestants and industrial accidents is...
Zero. Absolutely zero. It's just random chance that happens because Vijin compared thousands of data sets until he found two that lined up. And it proves a really important point.
Which is?
A pattern in the data is meaningless unless there is a plausible, testable mechanism connecting the two things.
Right. So spurious correlations are about chance. But the next big mechanical source of bullshit is more systematic. It's the distortion introduced by selection bias.
This is when the data we happen to observe are filtered in ways we don't account for.
And the most dangerous form of this bias comes up when performance metrics become high-stakes targets. This is formalized by Goodhart's law.
Which states, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure.
I feel like every manager needs this tattooed on their arm.
They really do. The moment you attach rewards or penalties to a metric, people will start to game the system, not the underlying goal the system was meant to achieve.
We have to talk about the truly spectacular example from the book.
Yeah.
The Hanoi rat massacre.
Oh, it's an all-timer. So French colonial authorities in Hanoi wanted to eradicate rats because of the bubonic plague. Simple enough goal.
Right.
So they offered a bounty for every rat tail brought to them. The metric, the tail count, was supposed to measure their success in eradication.
But the locals were a bit more clever than that.
Immediately, they realized they could just chop off the tails, collect the bounty, and then let the now tailless rats go free.
So they could reproduce.
So they could reproduce, guaranteeing a steady, profitable supply of future tails. The stated goal eradicating the plague was completely subverted by the measure the tail count. The system incentivized the exact opposite of the desired outcome.
And we see this in modern institutions all the time. If university rankings prioritize small class size.
Schools might be incentivized to just maximize the number of tiny niche classes for PhD students instead of what the metric was supposed to capture, which is a small average class size for all the undergraduates.
Then you have the simpler stuff, the observation selection effects that just warp our personal perception every day.
Yeah. The authors use the bus wait time example to explain that feeling you get that you always wait longer than you expect for a bus.
We've all been there.
So if buses arrived precisely every 10 minutes, your average wait time would be 5 minutes. Simple.
But they don't.
No, in reality, because of traffic and delays, buses tend to clump up.
Yeah.
And you are mathematically more likely to arrive at the bus stop during a long interval between buses than a short one.
So you're selected to experience the extreme end of the waiting spectrum.
Exactly. It's not bad luck. It's just geometry. Your perception is skewed because the data you observe, your wait time, is filtered by the structure of the system itself.
And this leads to the last kind of selection bias, which is maybe the most counterintuitive. It's how filtering data can create completely false negative correlations. This is Bergson's paradox.
Yeah, this one can be tricky. We often use the dating example to explain it. You know, the old complaint, why do all the attractive people I date seem like jerks? So in the general population, let's assume niceness and attractiveness are completely uncorrelated. You've got attractive jerks, attractive nice people, unattractive jerks, and unattractive nice people. All 4 quadrants.
But you apply a selection filter.
You do. You only agree to go on a date with someone if they exceed a certain minimum threshold of either niceness or attractiveness. You filter out everyone who is below average on both metrics.
So you remove that whole quadrant of people who are neither nice nor attractive.
Exactly. Now look at the remaining pool of people you're willing to date. If someone's extremely attractive, they don't have to be exceptionally nice to clear your threshold. They're already in.
Makes sense.
Conversely, if someone isn't conventionally attractive, they have to compensate by being exceptionally nice to pass your filter.
So within the highly filtered subset of people you actually date, you've accidentally created this artificial negative correlation.
Where none existed in the general population, the appearance of attractive people being jerks isn't some universal truth. It's a spurious finding created purely by your own selection criteria.
That is fascinating. Okay, let's shift our attention to maybe the most pervasive form of bullshit we see online. Misleading data visualizations.
Yeah, charts. The authors point out that charts just proliferated massively after the 1980s when digital plotting software became common. It made it easier than ever to turn numbers into visual spin.
And when that barrier to entry drops, the quality of the presentation often replaces the quality of the content. This leads to what they categorize with 2 great metaphors: ducks and glass slippers.
A duck is a visualization where the ornament completely overwhelms the purpose. The graphic is trying way too hard to be impressive or cute.
Right.
But the design choices actively obscure the data. Think of a 3D bar chart. where the angle or the thickness of the bars distorts the actual magnitude, or a chart that uses tiny decorative bicycles to illustrate education funding.
The visual appeal becomes the point, not the data integrity.
Exactly. But the glass slipper is even more insidious because it's trading on authority. This is where designers take one type of data and just force it into a visual structure that was designed for something else entirely.
Just to imply rigor where there is none?
That's it. Perfect examples are those faux periodic tables of marketing strategies you see online.
Oh, I've seen those.
Or the subway maps of data science skills. The actual periodic table of elements is authoritative because its physical structure reflects the underlying logical coherence of chemistry.
Right, there's a system there.
There's a system. When you impose that structure onto, say, SEO keywords or soft skills, you're ignoring the fact that there is no underlying logical system connecting them.
It just lends this false mathematical or systematic veneer, a mathiness they call it, to arguments that are purely qualitative. They look authoritative, but they're pure bullshit.
So, okay, beyond the fancy stuff, the simplest and most common form of visual manipulation is just in the axes. The fundamental rule for an instant bullshit check is this: always look at the axes.
For bar charts, which are telling stories about magnitude, the vertical axis must always include 0.
It has to. If the axis is truncated, a tiny difference can look like a massive shift. There's a chart they show of the increase in Tennessee non-farm employment. It looks like this huge surge of growth.
But when you check the y-axis,
It starts at 2,500,000, not 0. So it's massively exaggerating the proportional growth.
and what about line graphs?
Line graphs, which tell stories about changes in trends, they don't necessarily have to start at 0. But how you present them can still mislead. If you use a filled line chart, where the area under the curve is meant to show cumulative magnitude,
Then that has to start at 0.
it must. Otherwise, the shaded area is totally disproportionate to the actual value it's supposed to represent.
The most notorious use of this, of axis manipulation, which the authors just thoroughly debunk, is that anti-vaccination chart.
The one correlating rising autism rates with MMR vaccine coverage, yes.
When you look at that chart, the two trends seem to track each other so closely. It makes the argument visually persuasive.
Incredibly so. But the distortion is achieved by using two separate vertical axes. One for autism prevalence, scaled from 0 to 0.6%,
And the other?
and one for MMR coverage, scaled only from 86% to 95%. A tiny little window.
So by manipulating the scale of that right axis relative to the left, the chart creates this visual illusion.
An illusion that the proportional change in MMR coverage is tracking this perceived massive rise in autism, when in fact the change in vaccine coverage is tiny.
And when you put both data sets on a single, properly scaled axis, starting at 0,
The correlation visually collapses. It disappears.
finally, with time series data, especially financial charts, we have to be really wary of manipulating the timescale.
Oh, absolutely. If you zoom way in on a stock graph, a minor fluctuation can be made to look like a catastrophic crash. That serves the narrative of instability.
But you could also zoom way out over 5 or 10 years.
And then that same crash becomes just a tiny blip on an otherwise a positive trend, which serves the narrative of long-term stability. The choice of the temporal frame is often pure spin.
We spend a lot of time now dissecting the mechanical flaws, the lies of language, data, charts. Now we need to zoom out and examine the systems that allow this immense volume of polished bullshit to flourish and spread so quickly.
Yes, and the first and maybe the most crucial systemic principle to understand is Brandolini's principle.
What's that?
It's often summarized as, the amount of energy needed to refute bullshit is an order of magnitude bigger than that needed to produce it.
Okay, so this is the core energy mismatch that breaks the whole information system.
It is. Think about the thoroughly discredited link between vaccines and autism, which came from that one retracted paper by Andrew Wakefield. Producing that initial paper was relatively cheap and fast.
Refuting it.
That required decades of work, millions of dollars, meticulously structured meta-analyses, and thousands of researchers to produce this overwhelming, complex weight of scientific evidence.
And yet, despite being so thoroughly debunked, the fear persists.
It persists because it's so much easier to ingest that initial shocking claim than it is to process the complicated, often dry evidence required for the correction.
Falsehood flies, and the truth comes limping after. And this problem is just fundamentally made worse by the change in the media economy.
A huge change. In the pre-internet era, media relied on subscriptions. So to keep subscribers long-term, accuracy and quality were everything. There was a built-in incentive for a stable, trusting relationship.
But today, the internet news economy is almost entirely driven by clicks. When you click, the site gets immediate ad revenue.
So the incentive is no longer long-term retention through quality. It's short-term attention through sparkle.
This creates what they call an arms race of fluff.
Exactly. Publishers realize that people click on mental junk food. The desire to maximize eyeballs means that sophisticated analysis takes a backseat to, 7 cats that look like Disney princesses. It's a financially incentivized race to the bottom for novelty and emotional impact.
And you see this most clearly in how successful headlines are structured now.
Yeah, the analysis of millions of articles shows the most successful headlines don't convey facts anymore. They promise an emotional experience.
The authors note the most common successful Facebook headline phrase, by nearly twofold, is "will make you."
This story will make your heart break, or this will make you gasp in surprise.
It's a huge shift. Headlines used to be concise summaries of the story. Now, to guarantee that you click, they are intentionally vague.
They use forward reference headlines, forcing you to click to learn the essential information. Something like, how to evade the leading cause of death in the United States. They are designed not to inform you, but to compel you into engagement.
And the system is perfected by the users themselves, thanks to bullshit as a social signal.
This is such a critical point. We often think of sharing information as just the transfer of facts. But it's fundamentally about reinforcing our shared community identity.
So when you share content on social media,
you are often signaling loyalty and political affiliation to your online community much more strongly than you are affirming the truth of the story itself.
So if you share a wildly exaggerated story, like a ridiculous claim that Donald Trump sold the Washington Monument to a Russian oligarch,
you're signaling that your commitment to your group's values and narrative is so strong that you're willing to suspend disbelief for stories that confirm your worldview. The outrageous nature of the claim actually serves to strengthen the social signal of allegiance.
the signal, therefore, is more important than the truth contained in the content.
It is, and that's a profound shift in how we use and value information in our social lives.
So when you get these systems colliding, the click-driven economy, social signaling, that massive energy mismatch, the present-day implications are pretty severe. It leads to this crisis of viral misinformation.
The data on this is just crystal clear. False rumors spread further, faster, and deeper than true rumors. Facebook researchers found that even after a false claim was thoroughly debunked by Snopes, it continued to propagate widely.
The correction barely makes a dent.
It gets a fraction of the attention of the original falsehood.
The tragic, real-world example they use is the rumor after the 2013 Boston Marathon bombing.
Yeah, this story circulated wildly. It was about an 8-year-old girl, bib number 735, who had supposedly survived the Sandy Hook massacre, but was then tragically killed in the bombing.
And that terrible irony, that emotional weight, just propelled the story like wildfire across Twitter.
And it completely overwhelmed all the subsequent attempts to correct the record and say, no, this didn't actually happen.
And this kind of misinformation, especially political propaganda, is just so effective on social media.
It is, because it flows organically through trusted contacts, your friends, your family, your online peer group. If your dear uncle forwards you a story, your guard is naturally much, much lower than if you saw the same story on a political ad.
And the scale of this exposure is just overwhelming. As far back as 2017, Facebook had to admit that 126 million U.S. users were exposed to Russian propaganda.
And it was designed specifically to deepen ideological divides on issues like immigration and gun rights.
What's crucial to understand is that this modern propaganda often doesn't even care about consistency. It uses what's known as the fire hose strategy.
The goal isn't to convince you of one specific untruth. It's to overwhelm and confuse you with dozens of mutually contradictory stories all at once.
The ultimate goal, as the chess grandmaster Garry Kasparov described it, is to exhaust your critical thinking, to annihilate truth.
That's it. When citizens become so disoriented and despairing that they feel separating truth from falsehood is just impossible, the propaganda has won.
And we saw the immediate consequence of this chaos when one piece of entirely fake news led to a serious, high-stakes international nuclear threat exchange on Twitter.
The false report about the Israeli defense minister threatening Pakistan. Yes, the consequences of unchecked virality are immediate and terrifying.
And adding to this whole crisis is the threat of automated persuasion, the new counterfeiters.
We've always had to deal with the counterfeiting of money, but now we have to deal with the counterfeiting of people.
Estimates suggest nearly half of all internet traffic is just bots.
It's incredible. Facebook deleted nearly 3 billion fake accounts in 2018 alone. These automated accounts inflate engagement, they push ad revenue, and they amplify political propaganda through sheer volume.
Until recently, we had some defenses, right? We could use reverse image search to spot fake accounts using stock photos.
Yeah.
But that is changing very, very quickly.
With deepfakes and adversarial machine learning, these advanced algorithms can now fashion hyper-realistic faces of non-existent people out of whole cloth.
And this is a dangerous technological inflection point.
It is, because the tools are widely available, but public awareness of how sophisticated they are is still very low. The authors have a website, whichfaceisreal.com.
Yeah, I've tried it. It's hard.
It's very hard. It shows that even after you practice, people are still fooled by the fake faces 1 time in 5.
So the structural vulnerability is clear. Just as society eventually adjusted to early Photoshop by learning to seek out external verification.
Or adjusted to online anonymity by learning to triangulate, to seek multiple independent sources to confirm a story.
We now have to adjust to a world where we can't automatically trust the authenticity of a single image or video.
So, given all these mechanical tricks, all these systemic vulnerabilities, how do we fight back?
That's the big question.
The authors argue we need to develop skepticism as a skill. It's not about becoming a cynic. It's about making vigilance a continuous, practiced habit of mind.
And they offer 3 foundational questions that serve as a kind of instant internal bullshit detector. We should apply this to everything we consume.
Okay, number 1. Who is telling me this? This is the source credibility check. You assess the source's likely motivation and potential bias.
Right, so if you saw that fake photo of a politician burning a flag, and the photo was first posted by a Facebook group called Vets for the Opposing Candidate.
You immediately know the motivation is political signaling, not journalism.
Okay, number 2.
How do they know it? This is the basic plausibility check, and it can defeat numerical bullshit immediately. Remember that NASA press release?
The one claiming astronaut Scott Kelly had a 7% change in his genes after his year in space.
Yeah, that claim fails the plausibility check instantly. A chimpanzee's genome is only 2% different from a human's. A 7% change in a single lifetime is genetically absurd.
So what was the actual change?
It was in gene expression, the rate at which his unchanged genes were translated into proteins. It's a far less dramatic and entirely expected biological finding under stress. When a claim sounds numerically ridiculous, it usually is.
Okay, and the third question.
What are they trying to sell me? And remember, this isn't just about money. Are they selling you a car? Sure, maybe. But they might also be selling you an idea, a philosophical perspective, a political viewpoint, or a lifestyle.
Like the Goop Crystal Company selling chakra healing crystals for $85.
They are selling a holistic, pseudoscientific philosophy along with the physical product. The motivation is almost always persuasion or profit, and understanding that motive changes how you process the message.
So when a quantitative claim seems off, the next step they recommend is to think in orders of magnitude, using something called Fermi estimation.
Yeah, this is a great tool. Since bullshit is often indifferent to truth, the numbers are frequently off by a factor of 10 or more.
And the method is pretty simple. You just break down a large, unverifiable number into estimated components to quickly check if the claim is even remotely plausible.
Let's take the claim that there are 121,000 men in the UK named John Smith.
Okay, that sounds like a lot.
Let's break it down. 3 components. First, estimate the UK population, say around 67 million.
Okay,
Then, estimate the fraction of the population named John, maybe 1 in 40.
sounds reasonable.
And then estimate the fraction named Smith. It's a common name, so maybe 1 in 100.
So if we multiply those fractions together, 1 over 40 times 1 over 100, that's 1 over 4,000.
Right. And if we multiply the population, 67 million, by that estimated frequency, 1 over 4,000, our loose calculation gets us an estimate of roughly 16,750 John Smiths.
The original claim was 121,000.
It's a massive gap. Your quick estimate is off by a factor of nearly 8, which is roughly an order of magnitude. You know instantly, without looking up any exact data, that the 121,000 claim is bullshit.
It's a powerful shield against quantitative absurdity. But the authors argue that the most challenging source of bullshit is often internal.
It's confirmation bias.
Right.
The chief source of bullshit is often yourself. We are just less inclined to apply critical rigor to information that confirms what we already believe to be true.
If a story aligns with your political worldview, you are so much more likely to just click share without vetting the source or the data.
So vigilance has to start with self-checking.
And beyond that self-awareness, We need to champion the power of randomized controlled trials and null models to disarm all the selection bias and spurious correlations we see.
The RCT is our strongest weapon against selection bias. Remember the example of corporate wellness programs. Observational studies always showed that employees who participated had lower costs.
But that was selection bias. The healthier people were the ones who opted in the first place.
Exactly. When the University of Illinois ran a true RCT, randomly offering the program to some employees but not others, the trial found that simply offering the program had no statistically significant effect on healthcare costs or absenteeism.
The earlier studies were just measuring the difference between people who care about their health and those who don't. The program itself was basically irrelevant.
And null models provide that crucial final sanity check. They force us to ask, could this observed pattern have just arisen by chance, or through some simpler process we haven't considered?
Like the observation that runner performance declines with age. We assume that's just senescence, getting older.
But if you construct a null model that assumes age doesn't affect speed, but simply accounts for the fact that fewer people are running at older ages,
Because people just drop out of the activity.
that null model can still generate the same downward trend. It shows the data doesn't necessarily prove the cause you suspect. The pattern might just be an artifact of a decreasing sample size.
And on a very practical note for the online world, the authors just remind us to use the simple, underutilized tools that we have.
Like reverse image lookup on Google or Yandex, to fact-check profile photos or suspicious images. This is becoming so vital as deepfakes get better and harder to spot.
So at the end of the day, the effectiveness of bullshit seems to rest on a few systemic pillars.
I think so. The massive, disorienting volume of information, the perverse incentive structure of the digital age that prioritizes attention over quality,
The deep-seated social need to signal our group affiliation.
and that energy mismatch of Brandolini's principle, which ensures that falsehood just maintains a huge head start on the truth.
What's so encouraging about this deep dive, though, drawing from Bergstrom and West's work, is the final conclusion. The key defense against this onslaught is literacy, not technical expertise.
Exactly. You didn't need to be a data scientist to spot the 50% increase in taxes versus the 2 percentage point increase.
And you didn't need a math degree to see the truncated y-axis on that Tennessee employment chart.
The most egregious problems, the flawed data input, the manipulated axes, the absence of context, the broken causality, all of that can be spotted just by applying basic logic and clear thinking. You rarely have to open the black box.
Right. You don't have to understand the algorithm to know the results are garbage.
And I think there's a final point to make. Being able to spot bullshit is a private activity. It keeps you safe. But calling bullshit, that's a public act. It protects your entire community by increasing the social cost for the people who are purveying all this fluff.
It's a shared responsibility.
It is, and we have to remember the underlying fundamental challenge that undermines high-quality information. It was articulated centuries ago by Jonathan Swift, but it's more relevant than ever today.
What did he say?
Falsehood flies, and truth comes limping after it.
We have been discussing calling bullshit. The Art of Skepticism in a Data-Driven World by Carl T. Bergstrom and Jevin D. West.
A truly essential read for our times.
We strongly encourage you to read the book, support the authors, or check it out from your local library. For a shorter, visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description. If you enjoy systems-level analysis like this, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.